Hi, I'm Christy and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm here with my October reading wrap-up. Alright, so for the month of October, which I still can't believe we're already in the end of the year and wrapping up all the things, I did end up reading 39 books for October, and so this is my wrap-up of all of the books for the past couple months. I haven't done my mid-month wrap-ups like I used to do. I used to do like a mid-month wrap-up and then an end-of-the-month wrap-up, and like life and just everything has been kind of busy in the last few months, so I haven't gotten to do it broken up that way. So I've been doing these end of the month wrap-ups, which I kind of dread because I've talked about so many books, but also like I kind of like having them all in one place. So I don't know, let me know, what do you think? Do you like it when it was mid-month wrap-up and then an end of the month wrap-up? Do you like it all at the end of the month in one place? Does it matter to you? Do you care? Let me know, because I'm kind of like in the middle and kind of like both ways. I'm like, I don't know, so let me know. All right, so with that out of the way, we are going to talk about all 39 books that I read for October. And so as always, if you ever want to see more of my thoughts or my full reviews on any of the books that I read, I do review every single book that I read. I review them on Goodreads, and you can always get to my Goodreads through the links in my descriptions. It's always linked. All the books that I talk about are always linked in the descriptions of my videos. So if you miss one, want to go back and see which one I was talking about, they're always linked there as well. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's get into it. All right, so I started off the month with reading The Last Train to Key West by Chanel Cleeton. I have been on a Chanel Cleeton kick for the past like month and a half. If you haven't noticed, I have loved her books so much. This is actually one of my favorites from her. This is one of my favorite reads of the month. I gave this one 5 stars. This is the 3rd book in her Perez family series. So this is a historical fiction. I love Chanel Cleeton's writing. I love her books so much. Her historical fictions are the only ones that I've read, and I love them so much. I have gone on like a deep dive, a binge of all of her historical fictions, and I have loved them all so much. So spoiler alert, you're gonna see some of those in my video as well. So this book takes us back to 1935, and it is set in Florida. We also have like the Cuban Revolution happening, and we're following 3 women's stories, and they all kind of connect because they all go to this same diner. Like one of the women's stories that we're following, she works there, and 2 of the other women are kind of coming through town and has stopped at the diner throughout like their introduction into the book. And so we see kind of their stories as well. And then all of these women are going through different things. So we have one who is in an abusive relationship with her husband. We have another woman who has come down from, I think like New York area, I want to say. Like she's wealthy, has money, and she has come down to look for a man that she's searching for. And so she has come there. And then we have another woman who has just recently arrived to Florida from her honeymoon. She traveled from Havana with her husband, and so she's a newlywed. And so now she's in the US. And so like I said, yeah, we get all 3 of these women's stories, and I just love the way Chanel Cleeton blends these characters' stories with history as well. This book does heavily focus and feature around the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. I actually ended up reading this book around the same time that Hurricane Milton was happening, which wasn't planned, so that was kind of like it hit more, I feel like, reading this one, and kind of like all of that going on in the world as well at the same time. The Labor Day hurricane was actually the strongest and deadliest to hit the US. I think it was the first, at least in recorded history, Category 5 that hit the US as well. And so you definitely get a lot of that happening in the book. And I just loved how all these character stories kind of, they all blend together, and like over time you see how. Just so good. I love her historical fiction books so much. I can't say enough good things about them. I just love them to pieces. So yeah, 5 stars for this one. So good. Next, I read The Marriage Act by John Mars. So this one I ended up giving 3.5/4 stars. So John Mars kind of writes these mind-bendy, kind of like disturbingly near future sci-fi type thrillers, like kind of think of like Black Mirror episodes. That's kind of like the style of books that he writes. So I've read quite a few of his books. This one does exist in the same world as his other books, The One and The Passengers specifically, which I love both of those books, gave both of those 5 stars. So this one wasn't on the same level for me, but I feel like it was still an interesting time as well. So yeah, like I said, I gave it 3.5/4 stars. This one, the premise is basically like in near future in the UK, this kind of like right-wing government decides that they think they have the answer to all of society's issues, and it's the sanctity of marriage. And so they have this like Marriage Act, hence the name of the book, and kind of makes marriage the law, where it rewards people who are in marriages and kind of punishes those who remain single. So it gets very interesting. It also comes at a price, because there are also known as these like smart marriages, where basically a smart device is in your home and it listens to your entire relationship, your entire marriage, where it actually monitors and records conversations and people's relationship dynamics. And so it gets super interesting. We follow 4 different couples throughout the story, and they're kind of all in these different places, different like phases of a relationship. And so we kind of see that explored. I will say some of the stories stuck with me more than others. And when you read the story, you'll probably know which ones I'm talking about, like that hit a little bit harder, more emotional. And then some of the other characters, I didn't want their stories as much, so there was that. So yeah, 3.5/4 stars for this one. I love John Mars's writing overall and his storytelling. I love those kind of like darker society stories and kind of like technology as well, how that's involved. I just enjoy those types of stories overall. This one just wasn't my favorite of the ones I've read from him. Next, I ended up reading Make the Season Bright by Ashley Herring Blake. This was actually one that I was really looking forward to, and sadly I didn't love it that much, so I gave it 2.5, rounded up to 3 stars. I fully expected to love this book. I've loved the books I've read from this author. It is second chance. It's a holiday romance. It's sapphic. I thought it was going to be so good, and I was just kind of like meh about it. In this one, we see how the heroines were actually engaged in the past, and one of them actually stood up the other at the altar, and so now it's 5 years later, and they are kind of stuck together at the same place for the holidays, and kind of things go from there. It was mostly the characters I couldn't get behind in the story. I found them both kind of like unlikable, and I couldn't get behind their stories, and so I just didn't care about their relationship. I felt like the plot was kind of boring as well, and like at the end of it I didn't even want the characters back together, so like that's never a good sign. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, the author's writing is solid overall. I do love her writing style and her books usually. This one was just like a massive miss for me, so yeah, that was that one. Speaking of another miss for me is The Courting of Bristol Keats by Mary E. Pearson. I actually had an audio ALC of this one, so I listened to it early. It is out now. This one I ended up giving 2/2.5 stars to. So this is my first time reading this author. I have heard other friends who have loved her books in the past, so I don't know if it was just this book that wasn't good or just I'm not a fan of her writing. I don't know. But this one I just had a really hard time with. It is super long and I just found it super uninteresting. So much of what's happening in the story in this one happens off page. We're told about it, which is one of my least favorite things to read. I want to actually see the things happening instead of being told about them after the fact. So that was just like kind of a miss for me as well, and didn't help the like uninteresting, boring parts of the story. Like we don't even get to see some of the things that happen. I also feel like if you've read the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black, this book was basically kind of like trying to do that, but in a way that just didn't work for me at all. So I don't know, I have some thoughts about that. But anyways, 2 stars for this one. The cover I think is really pretty. The sprayed edges are really pretty. It just was a major miss for me. All right, next, another one that didn't work for me. It was just like a rough month, not gonna lie. So this one is The House at Witch Hill by Karen Marie Moning. So this month I read 2 books by this author. Had never read her books before. They're both different. This one is her brand new, kind of like a gothic mystery-ish one, paranormal vibes. And then I read later in the month, you'll see as well, a historical romance from her, and both of them I didn't love. So I don't think her writing is for me. This one, if I didn't say, I gave it 2 stars. This one I feel like it started off strong. It had a good premise, a good idea, and I feel like it just never got going on that, never delivered for me. I feel like the synopsis, it sounds so good, but then the book like doesn't deliver on any of that. And like I know it's going to be the first in a new trilogy series, something like that. And so maybe over time the story will actually and the plot like develop. But like for this to be so long, like I was just so bored. I could not with this book. I just wanted it to be over so quickly, which was a bummer because I love gothic stories. I love paranormal. I love stories that revolve around like a house where the house is a character as well. And I feel like this was just like a missed opportunity on all levels. And like I said, I just don't think her writing is for me, as well as I just thought this book was boring. So I don't know, 2 stars, which then I ended up reading Inheritance by Nora Roberts. And I feel like this book delivered on everything that I thought I was going to get from the previous book. And so I love this book. I gave it 4.5/5 stars. This book was so good. I love stories where somebody inherits a house. So in this book and the Karen Marie Moning book, that's both what was happening, like where somebody inherits a house and kind of goes from there. This one though was just so well done. It had paranormal vibes, it had ghosts, it was just like the perfect spooky season read. I love this one so much. So this one starts off with the heroine, and at the beginning of the story she finds out that her fiance is cheating on her, and then she decides, you know what, I kind of want to quit my job as well because they work together, and she's like, yeah, this isn't gonna work for me going forward, and like it's the perfect time for her to start her own kind of like graphic design business and do all of that. And then around the same time, she finds out that she inherits a home from an uncle that has passed away. And it gets more complicated because she never knew about this uncle. She found out that her father had a twin brother. Her father kind of was raised through adoption. And so he never knew about this other sibling. And so it's kind of a shock to her. And so she decides, you know what, I kind of want to go find out more about this, what's happening. Like the house is paid for. I just have to live there. It comes with like some stipulations where she has to live there for like X amount of years, I think like 3 years. And so she decides, you know what, like I have nothing else going on. I'm starting my own business. I can work from anywhere. Let me go up to Maine and like see what this house is about. So it kind of goes from there, and the heroine learns about her family history, which I love those kind of like explorations in stories. We also get these brides and these ghosts from ancestors in her past, who all these brides have like this curse kind of put on them, and they all end up dying on their wedding days. And so we see some of those kind of like glimpses and backstories. It was just so good. This one ends on a cliffhanger, and I am dying to pick up book 2, which actually might start sooner than later because I do have an audio audio ALC of it, and I cannot wait. This is the first in a new trilogy, and I just love it so much. So good. All right, and then I jumped into a Jingle Bell Mingle by Sierra Simone and Julie Murphy. This is, I think, book 3. Yeah, book 3 in their Christmas Notch series. They've had multiple full-length books and then a couple novellas in the series. I've read them all. I have a good time with the whole series. I just usually grab the audiobooks from my library, and I have really enjoyed them. This one I gave 4 stars to. This whole series, I feel like they're just such a fun time. They're centered around the holidays. They bring kind of all of the like holiday cheer. They're very spicy as well. Basically like kind of like Hallmark, but with spice is what the series is kind of described as. They're just like a lot of fun while also having like a lot of character depth, I feel like. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. This one we get a lot of forced proximity because basically the heroine and the hero end up becoming roommates and having to live together. The heroine's kind of like figuring out what she's gonna do. She was basically a part-time adult film star. She was a director for a little bit. So she's kind of had like a lot of different career paths, and right now she's on a new one because she accidentally kind of sold a screenplay that now she has to deliver on and write the story. So the heroine has a looming deadline, and she has like 6 months, I think, to write the story that she kind of like accidentally sold and had an idea for. And so she decides to go back to the town Christmas Notch in Vermont, where she kind of first had this idea for it. So she goes there back to the place where her inspiration was, and basically she's writing a story of like this local kind of like Christmas miracle. And so she decides, you know what, I need to go there to get inspired. So there she runs into the hero, who was like a former boy band kind of like heartthrob, and currently he's like just like the saddest boy in the music industry. He lost his wife, and so he kind of hasn't been writing music and anything since. He just stays in his house and kind of is just like sad boy. So he kind of has some similar career pressures with his music label wanting new music from him. They want like a Christmas album, and so he's kind of struggling with trying to write that. And so they end up kind of meeting and working together to kind of try to figure out this Christmas miracle story together, while they both kind of get inspired by being around one another, to her write her story, him kind of like want to do music again. And so I just love that like healing and comfort that they found with one another while kind of this whole story was being explored as well. So yeah, I had a good time with this one, 4 stars. All right, and then like I said, I was binging the Chanel Clayton series. So the next one is The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba. This is book 4 in her Perez family series, and this one I gave 4 stars to. This whole series I've honestly given 4 and 5 stars to all of them. I love them so much. Kind of like similar vibes. In this one we're following 3 revolutionary women who are fighting for freedom in their own different ways. So this one takes us to Gilded Age New York, kind of that turn of the century to the late 1890s, and we're following 3 different women. And so one of them works at the newspapers in New York, and so we get the kind of feuds raging between the 2 newspaper tycoons at the time, Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. So I kind of loved that aspect to the story. And then we also follow 2 women in Cuba. So one of them was unjustly imprisoned when she was just a teenager, and we kind of see her story of going through that. And then we see another woman who is in Cuba, and she's kind of working and passing notes secretly, and kind of like an insider kind of thing happening. And so it kind of goes from there. So like I said earlier, this historical fiction series is just so strong. I love the characters that we see, such strong women that we're following, as well as kind of the historical time periods we're in as well. And this one we're following the Cuban fight for independence from Spain. We see the kind of the starts of the Spanish-American War, and we also see the sinking of USS Maine. And so it was just like a very interesting time in history, and I loved how all of the stories kind of come together. Just so good. I love the series so much. 4 stars. Then I finished the series out with the last book in the series. So this is book 5 in the Perez family series, and this is Our Last Days in Barcelona, and I love this book so much. Gave it 4.5/5 stars. Another one of my favorites in the series. This whole series, like, we see different relatives of the Perez family. We are mostly focusing on the 3 like sisters of the story, and this is one of the sister stories that we haven't gotten yet. And here we also get their mother's story, which I thought was so interesting because she's such an interesting character that we've seen kind of featured throughout the series. This one actually is a follow-up to book 2, When We Left Cuba. It follows some events that have happened in that book, and so basically in here we see the older sister going to Spain, to Barcelona, particularly to find her sister who's kind of like missing, and working with the CIA, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with her, which we saw in her story, which was When We Left Cuba. And so in this one we see Isabel arriving to Barcelona. She's looking for her sister, goes to her apartment. Her sister isn't there, but this man is, who's also looking for her sister. And so they start kind of like teaming up together to figure out what's going on. And then at the same time we get the storyline of Isabel and the like Perez sisters' mother's story back during the 1930s, like 1935, 1936 in Barcelona as well. And we get some of her history and things that were happening with Spain kind of after World War I, pre-World War II time frame. So we see a lot of things happening in Spain and kind of the brink of civil war possibly in Spain happening, and then just these family like secrets kind of revealed throughout the story. It was just so good, which I just loved both of these characters' stories so much. Both of them are very strong women. Like I feel like the whole series follows strong women, but these two in particular are like just very headstrong characters that we've seen kind of glimpses of throughout the series, and so it was so good to get their book, and yeah, I just loved it so much. All right, so I switched it up and switched from historical fiction to dark romance. So I read Lights Out by Nevessa Allen. I had seen this one all over my Instagram feed for the past like a couple months. I decided to figure out what it was about, what was happening. I knew nothing about it, and I love this book so much. Gave it 5 stars. My favorite read of October. I love this one so much. I loved the characters in here. It is a dark romance, but I feel like it's not super duper dark. At least it wasn't for me at all. Basically in this one, we're following the heroine who was a trauma nurse, and then the hero is one of the masked men. He kind of makes like thirst traps videos where he does things in his mask, and she is a major fan of his videos. And so they actually know one another in real life as well. So it kind of has like secret hidden identity because he knows her and is kind of interested in her. He doesn't know she watches his videos at the beginning of the story, but like he knows her because she was kind of like casually hooking up with his roommate. And so the heroine though has no idea who the hero is. Like she doesn't know he's the masked man of the videos that she watches. And so it kind of starts off with the heroine deciding, after getting kind of like riled up after watching one of those videos, she decides to text her, you know, sometimes hookup buddy, and is like, hey, would you ever be interested in this? And she sends up a screenshot of the hero in like one of his masked videos. And so the guy's like, oh, like actually no, because I'm like seeing somebody now. And so it kind of like ends like it's fine, it's whatever. But then that guy ends up showing his roommate slash the hero the photo, and I was like, look at what this girl who like I was seeing casually for a bit is wanting me to do. Like, can you even believe this? And then the hero sees the photo and it's of him, and he's like, oh my god, wait, what? Like she watches my videos? And so he starts like doing a deep dive because he works in like cybersecurity, and decides to do a deep dive, kind of like stalker-ish vibes, and finds out more about her because, like I said, he knows her in real life. He just didn't know she watches his videos, and of course she has no idea who he is. And so it kind of goes from there. It's so good. The hero in this one, I love him to pieces. Like this one is very unhinged, but in an entertaining way. Like I loved their moments together. It's just so good. Like it kind of has like that dark humor wit to it, which I love, and it's just so good. The hero also has some things in his past. So basically his dad was somebody who people would make true crime stories about, and so he's never wanted to be likened to his father. He already looks similar to him, and that's kind of the reason why he wears masks. And he very much is kind of like naive to women and kind of like human interactions. He does everything kind of like on his computer instead. And so it is so quirky and adorable and fun seeing him try to like woo the heroine. It's just so much fun. I love this book to pieces. The audio is out on like Hoopla and Libby. That's where I listen to it. Highly recommend the audio in particular because the hero's voice at some parts has like a modulator. It's so good. Highly recommend. Like I love it so much. The hype was real. It's everywhere, but like for good reason. It's so good. Highly recommend you check it out. I love it so much. All right, next I jumped into another Chanel Clayton. So this is A Night at the Tropicana. This is actually an Audible original. So it's novella length, and if you download it on KU, you'll get the audio with it to listen to. So that's what I did. It's a little quick historical fiction novella, which I love because I feel like there aren't a lot of historical fiction novellas. Maybe there are and I just don't know about them, but I love this one. I give it 4 stars. Like all of her historical fictions, this one is dual timeline. So in the current time frame, it's like 1969 in Miami. The heroine is a doctor, and she is kind of doing this gala fundraiser for the hospital for like this new children's wing or something specifically. And so they're deciding to have this like kind of like Tropicana themed night in Miami. And so it kind of flashbacks in her mind to back in 1939 when she went to the opening of Tropicana in Havana. And so it is reminding her of that. And so we see this kind of like little past moment that could have been, and it was just so good. Like a little quick novella. It kind of was like bittersweet a bit, but like ends happily. So I really enjoyed it. So good. Really recommend all of her books, honestly. 4 stars. All right, so then I jumped into The 13th Child by Erin A. Craig. I love this author's books so much. If you haven't read some of her other books, highly recommend this one. I gave it 5 stars, but also House of Salt and Sorrows, House of Roots and Ruin. I love both of those so much as well. If you like kind of like YA fantasy, gothic, darker kind of like fairy tale elements, this book, those other 2 books I mentioned, They're all so good. I've given them all 5 stars. So this one is a dark gothic fairy tale retelling of Grimm's Godfather Death, and this one was just so, like, all of this author's books honestly are so atmospheric and moody and gothic, and that is just like totally my vibe all the time, and I loved it so much. I feel like this one was perfect for spooky season. If you can't tell, like, all these skulls, kind of the imagery on here, which, by the way, can we even? The gold sprayed edges in this beautiful edition from Barnes & Noble is just absolutely stunning. Like, can you even? I loved the edition. It's so pretty, and I love this book so much too. I feel like in a way this one kind of gave me slight vibes of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, which is another one of my favorites. And kind of similar just as far as like the mood that I got from both those books, the vibes are the same, I feel like. So if you like that book, highly recommend you check out this one. So basically in here we follow the heroine Hazel, and we see kind of like all of these birthdays of hers throughout the years, and she has a very complex relationship with her godfather, who is the god of death. And so every year on her birthday he kind of shows up for a visit, and so then on her 12th birthday, I believe it's her 12th birthday, he ends up kind of whisking her away and taking her away and says that he's going to be training her as a healer. And so it kind of goes from there. It's just so complex, I feel like, the characters, and so moody and so good. This one actually got me into my feels at the end. I was totally tearing up and had a little like cry session at the end of this book, which I wasn't expecting. And so yeah, I mean, for that alone, like 5 stars. If it's having me feel feels, 5 stars. So like I already said, the atmosphere, the vibes are totally there. It's kind of darker and gory at times. The heroine, we see her kind of struggling with being a healer, and sometimes she's giving life, she's healing people, sometimes she's having to take lives and make kind of those choices, and she's very much like struggling with the balance of life and death, which was so good. And I just, yeah, really enjoyed this one. So good. Really recommend. All right, so then I was just on a kick of good books for a bit. So then I read Blood Orange by Cuban Alys. This is a special edition that the Bookish Box did a few years ago, and I'm so glad I have this beautiful edition because I ended up loving this book so much, which, hold on a minute for the artwork as well. So this one I gave 4.5/5 stars to. I love this one to pieces. So this is the first book in her Dracula duet, which you have seen this whole world, this character in particular, the hero in here, featured throughout some of her other books. So while you can totally read this book, this duet on its own, I feel like if you read kind of her other books, so what is it? Black Sunshine, The Blood is Love, Night Wolf, if you've read all of those books, it kind of will like add more, I feel like, to the world, the characters, their history. So I don't know, it is a standalone, but like I feel like those add more if you've read all of those. So yeah. Anyways, so Dracula vibes, so it's obviously like vampire and paranormal, and it's just so good. So in here, the hero is basically the kind of like inspiration for Dracula in this world. So he's basically like one of the first vampires, and we see kind of his backstory and his history and his losses that he's had in life. And so now we see him in modern day, and he's working as a professor in Venice. And so one of his new students at the college is the heroine, and he's very, very pulled to her and very interested in her. But like there's something a little bit off about her at the same time, and he can't figure out why. And so we see in her POV that the heroine is actually has been trained by witches to take down the hero, Dracula, because her parents were killed by vampires, I feel like, years ago, and kind of taken in by this witch guild and trained, and she's supposed to be there to end his life. And so it's very like cat and mouse vibes. And so she has a glamour over her, and this book also has reincarnation, which is in the synopsis, it's in the blurb, that's not a spoiler, and it's just so good, the way that they connect and the history, and it's just, ugh. It's just so good. 4.5 stars/5 stars. Ends on a cliffhanger, which is wild. So of course I had to go into a book 2 next. All right, so then I jumped into the second book in the Dracula duet by Cuban Alys. So this is Black Rose. This one I had a little more issues with. I didn't love it quite as much as the first book, but I still enjoyed like seeing the conclusion of the characters' stories and their arc, if that makes sense. So this one I gave 3.5/4 stars to. This one I can't say too much about it, and you definitely can't read this one as a standalone. You have to read them in order as a duet, and so I can't say too much. But basically, if you love darker paranormal vampire romances, you like the whole soulmates and reincarnation situation, definitely read this duet. It's honestly so fun. The audiobooks were recently released, which is why I was waiting to read this series, and so I listened to these I think on Hoopla, probably on Libby as well. So yeah, I enjoy this duet overall, but the first book was definitely my favorite. All right, so then I had an arc of which this book is out now already too. It's Chase Our Forever by Kat Singleton. This is the third and final book in her Sun and Mountain series, which is a small town series, and I really really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars. This one is small town, grumpy sunshine, single dad nanny, billionaire hero, found family, slow burn, and I just had like a really good time with this one. Basically in here, the heroine has recently moved to Sutton Mountain, or she's actually traveling through. She hasn't decided if she's going to live there permanently. She's just kind of like traveling through, doing her thing, and when she's there, she ends up meeting some of the heroines of the previous books in the series, and they kind of convince her to, you know, like, you might want to stay around here, and she ends up meeting the hero and his daughter, and kind of accidentally becomes his nanny because he's in desperate need of a nanny at the time, and so it kind of goes from there with him wanting her to move in with them and live with them, and he's like, could you make this like a permanent thing? They're drawn together. I love single dad nanny. It's just so good, so sweet. Just really enjoyed this one, and like the whole found family aspect of it all, because the heroine has been through a lot in her life, and so it was super fun just seeing her get her HEA. Really enjoyed this one. I feel like this author's billionaire series, the whole like Black Ties and White Lies series, it gets more hype, but this series is just so good. I love her small town books so much. Very sad that this series is over, but I'm very excited for what she's having come out next. So yeah, 4 stars for this one. All right, and then I did a reread of Devilin Winter by Lisa Kleypas, which let's show that gorgeous step back of Evie and Sebastian St. Vincent. This is one of my favorite historical romances of all time. One of my favorite books. I've reread it multiple times. I'm currently a co-host for a Wallflowers read along, so that is why I reread it this month. I gave it 5 stars. If you couldn't guess, it's one of my favorites. I love it so much. This book is basically the epitome of a wallflower and a rake in historical romances. It has a marriage of convenience. It has a traveling to Gretna Green to Scotland to get married. It has a little carriage road trip situation. It's just so good. These characters are everything. I love them so much. I love Evie. I love Sebastian St. Vincent. It's just so good. And I just love this book. Like, I don't know what else to say. I love this book so much. It's so good. If you haven't read it yet, highly recommend checking out the Wallflower series. I have a whole guide to Lisa Kleypas books, kind of where to start, and the series is like a great place to start with her books. So yeah, I love them so much. So good. Definitely read the series in order. This book will hit more, I feel like, if you read in order and get to see a little like redemption happening. Love it so much. Devilin Winter, so good. All right, and then I had an audio ALC of Mr. Heartbreaker by Piper Rain. So this is the first book in a new series. It's called The Nest, and this one I gave 3 stars to. I've read quite a few books from this author duo now, and I feel like I like some of their maybe like more darker romances instead. This one was like a fun time. It's a hockey romance. This is also brother's best friend, teammate's sister. It has kind of like a secret hidden identity trope situation. So this one kicks off with the hero and the heroine. They meet at a wedding. They share a night together. They both kind of realize they kind of want a little bit more, even though they thought it was only going to be one night. And it kind of gets complicated because the heroine knows who the hero is. Like the whole time she's known who he is, that he used to play hockey with her brother, that he knows her as well. He just doesn't remember apparently. But then the deception kind of gets another layer added to it as well, because she also gives the hero a fake name, so he doesn't realize who she is. And then her brother ends up getting transferred to the hockey team that the hero plays on, so they're going to be around each other a lot more, and it just kind of goes from there. So it was just okay. I feel like if I didn't have the audiobook and the ALC of it, I wouldn't have gotten to this book, so it was fine. It has a full cast. Like, I don't know, it was fine, 3 stars. Next, I had an audio ALC of Shatter Dreams by Natasha Madison, which can we just, with this kind of like flipped book happening, like the couple cover and then the picturesque kind of like scenic cover as well. Love it so much. I was sent this in a PR package from the author and got so many like really cute, pretty goodies with it as well. This book I loved. One of my favorite reads of October as well. I gave it 5 stars. I was really surprised because this author, I've read tons of her books in the past, but they're always kind of just like, they're good. They're fine for me. Like, I think I've given them all like 3, 4 stars, nothing over 4 stars though. And so this was my first 5-star read from her, and I loved it so much. Just the start of a new series. It's so angsty. It's so emotional. I ate it up, honestly. This one is small town. It is hate to love. We have the heroine returning to her hometown. The hero hates her for reasons. We have both of the hero and the heroine are kind of healing after trauma and loss. They're in a situation where basically there was a group of 6 friends who got in a car crash and people died during that. And the hero has always kind of blamed the heroine through his pain and trauma. And so now she's back in their hometown. Like the whole town kind of hates her and her family, and he does as well. And it kind of goes from there. But like the healing and the comfort and the emotions and the hate love banging, it was honestly so good, and I loved seeing these two like be able to kind of get over things together, heal together, care for one another. Like, I just loved their romance so much. So emotional, so angsty, so good. So yeah, highly recommend. I gave it 5 stars. I'm very excited for the rest of the series and now as well. Next, I decided to read a Ruby Dixon novella. So I think the novella-thon was happening and I decided to get to some of the novellas on my TBR. So this one is Servant to the Spidey. I think this is part of her Aspect and Anchor series. It's a novella. It's kind of like a menage poly situation where the heroine ends up becoming the anchor to these 3 kind of like gods in the world, and it kind of goes from there with all of their little stories and moments and kind of taking care of one another. Like, it was fine. I loved seeing the heroine kind of like learning to handle each of these trio of gods like differently, spending time with them separately. I feel like towards the end it kind of got a little bit repetitive, so not my favorite thing from Ruby Dixon, but I love Ruby Dixon's books so much. This series has just been like okay for me so far. Next, I read Mine for a Moment by Katarina Mora. I have this really pretty Barnes & Noble pink edition that I got as well. I fully expected to love this book and I sadly did not. This one I gave 3 stars to. This is the author's first traditionally published book, so she got picked up by Bloom Books and this was her first book with the Trad Publishing. So yeah, I don't know. Let's get into it. This author kind of always delivers on very steamy but like entertaining kind of like fun times, I guess. And so I was fully expecting that. I know how her writing style is, but I feel like in this case, her writing style just felt very rushed and I didn't feel like the characters were very fleshed out. And I feel like by the end, I just wanted more of the characters and their story and I just didn't really connect to them overall. So this is a spinoff from her Windsor series, which I have really enjoyed. And so this one you can totally just like start it and read it on its own. So this one starts off with the heroine. She wants to lose her virginity and the man that she's interested in is the hero, which happens to be her brother's best friend, also her boss. And so it's very complicated. So this one, like, you get all those moments that you get from billionaire kind of romances of the hero like super spoiling her and doing all these nice things for her, going on trips, the lavish gifts, the spoiling, all of that I really enjoyed. I just wanted like a little bit more to the story, a little bit more to the characters. I feel like there wasn't a lot of depth with them. And then there's kind of like this moment with this other character that happens towards the end of the story, which if you've read it, you'll know what I mean, that I just wasn't a fan of how that kind of went down. So yeah, 3 stars overall. I really enjoy this author's writing in general. I have read just so many other of her books that I love more. So yeah, 3 stars for this one. All right, so then I read The Life Impossible by Matt Haig, and this one I hated. I gave it 2 stars. Do not recommend. I did not enjoy it. And this is coming from somebody who loved The Midnight Library by this author, one of my favorite books. And so this book I had really high hopes for. It was so disappointing. I gave it 2 stars. And this one, it starts off basically with the heroine. She's kind of like this retired math teacher and she ends up getting a letter from one of her former students who is now in college and just kind of like struggling with life, with relationships, just kind of like trying to figure everything out. And so she responds to the letter, and that is the entirety of this book, is her letter back to him. And instead she talks about like things she's going through, this house she was left, and just kind of like this whole long tirade of a story. And I was like, the boy just wants help. Like, could you just talk to him? So I don't know. 2 stars, did not love this. Honestly wanted it to be over sooner than it was. Next up, I read The Porcelain Maker by Sarah Freethy. I have a physical copy of this one, but my parents are currently borrowing it, so here is the image of it instead. This one was our Leave It to the Pros book club, which is a historical fiction book club that I run with Tori from Novel Life. This was our October pick, and I really enjoyed this one and gave it 4 stars. This one spans a lot of years. We start off in 1925 in Germany, and we kind of see before, pre-World War II, during World War II, and we see years and years after that up into the 1990s when we're following this woman at the beginning of the story. She's going to an auction where basically she's trying to track down these porcelain figurines because she feels like it's going to lead to who her father is. And so it kind of goes from there, and then we see the like backstory, the history, and her parents' story. So we jump back to 1925 and we see these 2 kind of like young artists in love in school, and they kind of like find one another and fall in love. We see their love story. The heroine is a German modern artist and the hero is an architect student, and he's also an Austrian Jew, and so their lives get very complicated because they fall in love, and they were kind of gearing up to World War II and kind of everything happening in Germany around that time. And it kind of goes into that. We see time at the Dachau concentration camp in Germany, which is basically where the porcelain factory is that this whole kind of book kind of focuses around, which is kind of why this book caught my interest originally, because I lived in Germany when I was a teenager and we did go to this concentration camp and saw some of the things there as well. And so just kind of like having that little history aspect to it, I kind of wanted to read this book. That's why my parents are reading the book right now. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I really loved the author's writing, and the story like had emotional elements to it, and I just really liked kind of like the past and present. I feel like they're really strong. Her writing's really strong. So yeah, I would definitely read more from this author in the future. Gave it 4 stars. All right, next I read The Wickedness of a Highlander by Lisa Braden. This is the 4th book in her Midnights in Scotland series. I gave this one 4 stars. I love Lisa Braden's historical romances. She's an indie historical romance author. I have read all of her books, really enjoy them. So I had to get to this newest release, which came out earlier this year. This one is a Highlander historical romance. So it takes place in Scotland. We have a Grumpy Sunshine vibes. We have forced proximity. There's like only one horse moment. There's a lot of banter as well, so I really enjoyed this one. The two characters in this one, we've seen them kind of featured throughout the previous books in the series. I feel like this series, actually kind of all of this author's books, her other series as well, I feel like both of them are best read in order. You're going to get more from the characters and kind of the overall story as well. It just like goes better, I feel like, if you read them in order. Basically in this one, the heroine is the sister of a lord, and she's kind of lived her life in this kind of like sheltered lifestyle. And so she decides to travel to Scotland, and she wants to apologize for all the things that her brother did, which, like I said, if you've read the previous books, then you'll know like what's going on with that. So along the way, she ends up getting robbed, and then the family that she came to like apologize to, they're all gone, but the only one there is the hero, and he's the grumpiest one and the one who hates her the most. But it's really kind of more of the case of he hates the way she makes him feel. So it's just so good. Really enjoy this one if you love like a Highlander historical romance. This whole series is really, really good. All right, so next I jump back to another Chanel Clayton historical fiction because you just can't keep me away from her books. So this is The Cuban Alys, and this one I gave 4 stars to. This one was really good. I feel like the audiobook especially, I love her audios in particular, and this audiobook I feel like was just so well done. This one also has a kind of like historical fiction mystery element to it, and I just really enjoyed it. This one takes place in the 1930s, and this is one of the cases where it's not like a dual timeline situation. So in here we're following a luxury cruise and kind of its round trip voyage from New York down to Havana and back. And it was really interesting because this book is actually based on a real particular luxury cruise and kind of luxury cruises around that time that started during Prohibition years and would allow kind of like US travelers to get on there and party and drink and do all the things as they went down to Havana and came back. So on top of kind of being a party cruise, there was also like this rumor of things being smuggled back from Cuba to the US on this ship as well. And so like I said, there's a mystery element to it. We're following 2 women in particular. One of them is this New York heiress who is traveling with her fiance, and then we follow the other heroine who has a connection to the same man as well. And so it kind of goes from there. I really enjoyed this one. Like I said, this month was just kind of a miss for me with some of the other books. So then I read Spitting Gold by Carmela Locus, and this one I did not enjoy. I gave it 2 stars. Like this book, I don't even know. Like this book, I had a hard time even finishing it. It was so disappointing. I don't even know what was going on or what was supposed to happen. Just no. No, thank you. Let's go to the next. All right, so then I picked up a Boo Thing by Rilsey Adams. This was for the novellathon that was happening that a couple friends were doing. And so this one I ended up giving 3 stars to. This Halloween novella was actually on my TBR from the previous year, and I just didn't get to it in time. And so I had wanted to get to it this year anyways, and then it was their like novellathon group pick. And so I was like, perfect, I will read it as well. So like, it was just okay. I gave it 3 stars. I have read other books from Rilsey Adams that I enjoyed more. So this one was just kind of like, it was just okay for me. This one is Friends to Lovers. It's best friend's brother. We have a little bit of an age gap, or like the heroine is a little bit older than the hero. We have a very much like hero pining he fell first situation, and kind of like a little bit of a vacation fling as well. In here, the heroine and her best friend were supposed to have this like kind of like Halloween weekend getaway to Mexico, and her best friend can't make it now, and so the heroine is still gonna go, and so her best friend's brother, the hero, ends up coming with her instead. And so it kind of goes from there with he has always been into her. She has been his crush for forever, and so he's ready to like make his move and to prove to her how much he wants her, how perfect they are together, and it kind of goes from there. So yeah, it was cute, it was steamy, it was fun, it was a quick novella. I just have liked others from this author more, so yeah, 3 stars. All right, so next up was the Historical Hellions book club pick for October. So I am a co-host of the Historical Hellions book club. This is a book club where we read historical romances published before the year 2000, and so I'm a co-host along with Jess from Peace Love Books and Samantha from Books with Samantha. This was our October pick, which is Beyond the Highland Mist by Karen Marie Montey, and I didn't like this one. I gave it 2 stars. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I just don't think this author's writing is for me. I don't connect with it on any level. I read her newest kind of like a gothic paranormal book. I read this older kind of like beloved paranormally Highlander romance series, Time Travel. Didn't love this one either. So I don't think I want to try any more of her books, honestly. So it was just a miss for me overall. So basically in this book, the heroine ends up getting thrown back into time, into medieval, kind of like 1500s Scotland. That's where the hero is, and it goes from there. It's kind of like has this like quirky-ish element to it, and kind of like has like these fae creatures, fae queen. It was just kind of like, I didn't love it. Not for me, 2 stars, let's move on. All right, so next I ended up doing another novella, because like I said, the novellathon was happening for some of these reads. So it is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. I had been wanting to read this author's books for quite some time now and just kind of didn't know where to start. So I just decided, let's just jump in. And I started with this kind of novella duet. There's 2 books in the series, and I ended up reading both of them this month, but the first one is What Moves the Dead, and this one I gave 4 stars to and had a really good time with it. This one honestly grabbed my attention because of this just like bold graphic cover that I just was obsessed with. It was also gothic horror, and so I was like, say less, I'm in. So I was already into it just based off of the cover, the gothic horror vibes, like I wanted to try it out. And then when I started reading it, I realized that it was a kind of like reimagining, retelling inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, The Fall of the House of Usher, which I love Edgar Allan Poe so much. I've been obsessed with his stories since I was literally like in elementary school. I love his stories so much. Just like the gothic horror moods, I am always here for that. That is just such my vibe. So I had a really good time with this one. So it was just a fun time seeing this kind of like take on the story. I will say, if you're already familiar with The Fall of the House of Usher, like this ending isn't going to surprise you. It's kind of exactly what goes on in that story. So like there was no reveal or shock or surprise from me, but the characters and kind of this whole story I was just really into. So I had a good time with it, 4 stars. All right, so then I read Can Playa from Ali Hazelwood. This is another novella that released at the beginning of the month, and it's supposed to be like Spotify exclusive, but for some reason like my library had the audio, so not complaining because it got me to get to it. So this one I gave 3/3.5 stars. I have read everything that Ali Hazelwood writes. I don't know, I'm always pulled to her stories and kind of just want to see what they're about. So I've read all of her books, I've read all of her novellas, and this one was just kind of like middle of the road for me. This one I feel like is just very typical Ali Hazelwood setup where they work together, she thinks they're enemies, they're actually not, miscommunication, and it kind of goes from there. I will say on this one, unlike most of her other books though, this one doesn't take place in a science lab, which I love a science lab setup, but this one was kind of nice because it follows these video game developers instead, which I love video games. We're a huge like video game playing house. I have grown up playing video games. I love them so much. And so I was really excited for that aspect of the story where basically the heroine has kind of gotten this dream chance to possibly pitch an idea where basically she has been kind of given the chance to develop one of her favorite book series into video games. So it's like the dream role for her, but she has to work with a hero who, like I said, she thinks that he hates her. We of course know that he does not. He's super smitten. So I did think that was super adorable. And like, it was just it was a fun time. It was okay. Like nothing terrible, but nothing like extraordinary at the same time. So yeah, 3.5 stars for me. All right, so then I wanted to get to some other like paranormal kind of like spooky season reads. So I read The Marriage Heex by Sarah Blue, and this one I really liked. I gave it 4 stars. This was actually the first book I have read from this author. I've been meaning to read her books for quite some time, and now I definitely want to make her other books a priority. This one was a lot of fun. It's a paranormal romance where we have a witch heroine and a werewolf kind of wolf shifter hero. It's also one of my favorite subtropes, which is childhood best friends turned enemies turned lovers. It also has a marriage pact in here as well, which I love, where basically they were raised in the same kind of like home or orphanage together, and they were friends when they were teenagers, and they ended up making this kind of pact that they would get married one day, which they didn't realize that the heroine was actually a witch, and there was magic involved with this pact as well. So the pact is like magically bonded now, and so basically shortly after they made that pact, she ended up finding out kind of the history of her life, her family, the fact that she's a witch. She got kind of like taken away in the middle of the night from the orphanage and to say goodbye to him, and so he's always felt a certain way about kind of being abandoned like that. And then we see them years later now, and it is like the heroine's 30th birthday, which is kind of what they made the pact around, like them being 30, and if they were still single they'd get married. And so now they realize that was like actually magically bound, and they have to get married to kind of appease magic systems. And so basically she is with this witch coven, and the hero is the alpha of the werewolf kind of wolf shifter pack, and they're mortal enemies, and it kind of goes from there. All right, so next I ended up reading Bull Moon Rising by Ruby Dixon. This is her newest release, and this one I really loved. I gave it 4.5 stars. I do feel like it was a little too long, which was honestly my only issue with it. I feel like it could have been a little bit shorter. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. And this cover, the sprayed edges, this edition is just so pretty. Love the art that we have in here. And then this kind of like gorgeous weathered kind of like leather look. It's just so stinking pretty. Really love this book and highly recommend. I'm just like a Ruby Dixon stan forever. And this one I really enjoyed. Basically in here, the hero is a minotaur and the heroine is a human. And she's trying to join this kind of like artifacts guild situation. And basically she goes there and she's expecting to join up, and she finds out that women are not allowed to join without like a chaperone or kind of like all these like little caveats to that situation. So she's like, that's fine. I'll just like marry the instructor who's the hero, because she finds out that he is a minotaur obviously, and he's going through rut. And so he's like, I need like somebody to kind of like, you know, take some things from me during this time. And so she's like, well, I can help you out, and I can do that while you help me out by letting me marry you tomorrow, have you as my chaperone, and then I can join the guild. So it has kind of this like student teacher situation as well, and it's just so good. I love the heroine in here. She's like plus size and she's just so like sunshiny and charming, and I just adored this one, especially on audio. It's so good. Highly recommend. I had a good time with this one. I feel like in the middle towards the end it kind of got a little bit of the same repetitiveness where I felt like it could have been a little bit shorter, but other than that, such a good time. 4.5 stars for this one. So then I decided to read another kind of like spooky season read. So I read The Wedding Witch by Erin Sterling, and this is the third book in her Hex series. I had forgotten I read the first book in the series, and that one was just like okay for me. I think I gave it 3 stars. This one as well I gave 3 stars. I was hoping to like it more because I feel like I saw people loving this one, but like it was just okay for me. I don't think this specific series from the author is for me. So like it was okay. It was like a cute kind of like witchy set in Scotland kind of like situation, and the audiobook was really short. I think it was like 7-ish hours, so there was that, so I liked that aspect of it. Oh, which I didn't even say what this one was about, but basically if you want kind of more of a lighthearted kind of like paranormally witchy world kind of situation, there's like a little bit of a time travel situation. The hero lives in Wales. He's a bit of a loner and who just wants to like research ancient magic, and his heroine gets hired to kind of find this artifact or piece for one of his like wealthy clients. He's smitten, kind of goes from there. Like it was okay, it was fine, just like nothing spectacular. So yeah, 3 stars. Then I jumped into another Ruby Dixon novella because you just can't keep me away from her books. This one is Only the Clonely. So the audiobook came out recently. I decided to give it a try. It's the first book in the Sunrise Cantina series, so maybe there's more coming. I didn't even check. This one was okay. I gave it 3 stars. Okay, this one is actually not a novella, but that was one of my issues. I felt like it should have been a novella and shorter. I think I would have enjoyed it more that way. Basically in this one, the heroine wakes up and she realizes that she was drugged and dragged through space, and she wakes up realizing now that she's a clone, and so her whole world is kind of like shaken and disturbed. So she's kind of at this space fort, and so she ends up meeting the hero who kind of works there as a security officer and kind of offers her up his protection. This one, it started off really strong, and I just felt like I got everything I needed out of it early on to the book, and I was just like done with it, but it was still going. So I feel like that's kind of my case with a lot of these books lately. I feel like they're just longer than necessary, than they're needed, and so I felt like this one could have been shorter. I would have enjoyed it more, but for what it was, 3 stars. All right, next up I read a couple of historical romance novellas, some newer releases. So we have The Scandal of Rose by Joanna Shupe. This one I fully expected to love and adore it. I've read every single thing by Joanna Shupe, all of her books under her pen name Mila Finelli. I love her books so much. I love her writing. This one was kind of a miss for me. I gave it 3/3.5 stars. So this one is a Gilded Age historical romance novella. It has age gap, it has class difference, it's kind of like a mistress setup. In this one we follow the heroine. She's an actress, and the hero is a wealthy kind of businessman who has been following all of her performances, and basically she wants only one night of fun with him, but he is like, no, we need more. He wants her to become his mistress, and so it kind of goes from there. This one is kind of like slightly messy adjacent because it involves like somebody being engaged to somebody else. There's age gap. She's 19, he's like I think 38, like double her age. I don't know, the couple in this one, I just never connected to these characters, so I didn't care as much for their story. So I had a hard time with this novella, but yeah, 3 stars. So then I read Once Upon a Haunted Night by Elisa Braden. This is one of her like historical romance novellas. This one was part of an anthology last year, I believe, and it kind of got separated from the anthology and released as its own Kindle Unlimited release. And so I decided to grab it and read it. Actually, both of these 2 novellas I read on my way back from the Love in Vegas book signing on my trip back on the airplane. So yeah, this one I also gave 3 stars too. This one, basically the heroine in here is a housekeeper. She's been a maid her entire life, and she's working at this new house and is kind of like taking care of the library, and she's really drawn to this portrait in there hanging up on the walls, and then she kind of like has conversations with it. Like she thinks they're in her head, but then she's realizing that like things are actually happening, and the portrait is actually the hero, and he has a story of kind of being trapped into the painting in time, and it kind of goes from there. So it was good. It was just like a really quick read, and I feel like I wasn't super attached to it, but it was a fun time. He's a medieval knight. There's a curse involved, like a library, a cat, kind of all these things. It was like cute and fun. It was fine. 3 stars. All right, so then I got back to the T. Kingfisher series that I said I was reading. So this is the second novella in the series, which is What Feasts at Night. Again, I love this cover so much. This one I sadly didn't love as much as I did the first one. Basically, we're following one of the characters from the other novella. We see that character in both of these, and so this is like a totally different story going on that's happening, and I just didn't connect to it, so I gave this one 3 stars. I am, though, excited to read more from this author in general, and I have a couple more of their audios out currently from my library, so I do love their writing. This one I just didn't love as much as the first book in the kind of like novella series. All right, so then another novella, because October I was just having a rough time at the end of the month. I was having like a lot of lackluster reads, and novellas were honestly the only thing that were keeping my attention at the time. Like, All the other books I felt like were too long, not needed, and I just couldn't focus on other books. So yeah, novellas is what I was reading. So the next one is Barbarians Treat by Ruby Dixon. I gave this one 4 stars. This one's really cute. It's a new release for the Ice Planet Barbarians series, a novella part of the series, and I love that series so much. So it was so fun to kind of go back and see a lot of these like OG couples, and we get a lot of like mentions and moments with a ton of characters throughout the series. And basically it's their take on having Halloween on Not Hoth, the ice planet where they live. And it was just so fun. It was so cute. It was so charming. Like, it was adorable. Maybe more like 3.5 stars, but I rounded up to 4. It was a fun time. All right, so then I decided to read my Vampire Plus One by Jenna Levine. This one I didn't plan to get to because I had read My Roommate is a Vampire last year or whenever it came out. It's very like paranormal rom-com, which isn't always my favorite thing. And like that one I had given 3 stars to. It was fine. It just wasn't a favorite. But then I saw people reading this one and loving it and saying it was so much better. So I decided to give it a go. And I do agree it was better. It just wasn't everything I ever needed in life. So I gave it 3.5/4 stars. It was a fun time, but I'm glad I just did the audio from my library. This one, again, we get that like paranormal rom-com. The hero is a vampire and we get fake dating in this one, which was fun. And basically in here, it was really cute how the hero thinks the heroine knows he's a vampire for quite a bit of the story and she doesn't realize it. And so it was super like just cute and charming when she finally realizes that he's a vampire and kind of what's happening with the world around her. Like, it was fine. It was fun. 3.5/4 stars. All right, so then I ended the month with Sunday Morning by Jewel E. Ann, and this one I gave 4 stars to. It's the start of her new Sunday Morning series. This one I didn't know too much about. I just knew it was forbidden, a little bit angsty, and I decided to give it a go. This author in the past has been kind of hit and miss for me, but this one I liked. I did like it. Like, it actually helped me get back into like Kindle ebook reads because like nothing else was keeping my attention. Audiobooks were the only thing working for me. Novellas were the only things that I had like the attention and the focus for. And so it did actually help me get back into reading longer books on my Kindle. So I'm glad for that because I was super invested and got through the story like in a day, but I did have like some issues with the story as well. So let me tell you what it's about because that was a whole long little tirade. All right, so this is a forbidden romance, bad boy, good girl vibes. We get age gap, opposites attract. She's a preacher's daughter, he's a cowboy. Oh, and he's also her boyfriend's older brother. This one, like I said, I didn't know anything about it going in. So when I jumped into it and realized that it takes place in the 1980s, I had a really good time with it. So it takes place in 1985, and I just kind of feel like that adds and like leads to this like kind of like melancholy, moody read and vibe. Like Older by Jennifer Hartman takes place in the 90s, and that book as well. I feel like these two books are very similar. So if you enjoy that one, maybe check out this one and vice versa. So I had a good time with this one. It's very like angsty. I will say at times it feels a little bit too repetitive and a little bit too much in the kind of like drama of it all, but like I enjoyed it for what it was. I liked it. I didn't love it, but I liked it enough. Basically in here we deal with a lot of like religious trauma and kind of like going through that situation as well, where the heroine is a preacher's daughter. She has just turned 18. It's the summer after she graduated high school, and she's kind of like figuring out what she wants to do with her life. Like, she has always just kind of like appeased her family, appeased everybody in their kind of like small town. She's dating the same guy. Everybody's assuming they're gonna get married, but her and her boyfriend are kind of like, they're not interested in getting married, but they're just kind of like writing out their relationship until the end of summer when they go kind of their separate ways, because he's going to go off to college for football, I believe, definitely sports related. And then she kind of wants to become a country music singer, songwriter, and do her own thing. And they just don't want to like break the news to the community, to their families, that they're like not interested in staying together long term. So like it's kind of forbidden because the hero is her boyfriend's older brother, and she's still with the boyfriend for some of the time of the story. But like also it's not that complicated because her relationship with the boyfriend is over without being over, if that makes sense. Like, they're not gonna be staying together, but they're still together. So I don't know, it's complicated. I think the hero in this one in particular made the story for me because he's just very much wants the best for her, and he's probably the only person in her life who is looking out for her and wants her to find herself, and is just like all in for like who she is organically and underneath it all. So I really did appreciate that. Like I said, it's a little bit repetitive, it's a little bit slow, but I feel like that just kind of adds to like the melancholy kind of like the vibes of being set in the 80s. And so I had a good time with it. I'm kind of excited for the next book in the series, which is going to be her sister's story, and like the tropes for that. Very excited. So yeah, 4 stars for this one. And like I said, it got me back into being able to focus and read full-length books on my Kindle. What a shock. And so for that, I just like am super appreciative. All right, so those are all 39 books that I read for October. Definitely let me know in the comments if you read any of the books that I did, if you had any favorite reads for October. I would love to know. Like I said, I linked all the books that I talked about, so if you missed any, missed the titles titles, miss the authors. They're all linked in the description of the video. You can also get to my Goodreads through there if you want to see even more of my thoughts, get more in depth with what I thought of all of these books. My Goodreads is always linked as well. If you'd rather leave me an emoji in the comments today to let me know that you watched this video, leave me a skull emoji, since Lights Out was my favorite book this month. So yeah, leave me a skull emoji in the comments. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my future videos, and I will see you in my next one.